Sorry about that, Emily. That was
All right. Thank you, Carolina. It's always wonderful to have a sponsee to drag you to do the things you need to do. I hate telling my story because I always feel like I'm a bit of a alcoholic imposter. Like maybe my story wasn't alcoholic enough. But I appreciate the chance to share. And there's a whole bunch of you, so I'm just going to hide out behind this photo and not share my books. Um, Anyway, I guess that I learned about alcoholism pretty early on from growing up with my dad, an alcoholic family, and he was a very gregarious, charismatic, domineering, intellectual alcoholic. And he was a very classic alcoholic, the kind who like hid the bottles in the closets and started barricading himself in the house so that he wouldn't wander off during blackouts, and gave us sips of beer and whatnot. Um, and so I very early on experienced that shame and that crazy making of having all this insanity happen, like in the evenings, and then the next day having to pretend everything was okay. So my parents split up when we were pretty little, and my mom married someone who was the exact opposite of my dad in every way. It was a pretty normal childhood. It was fine. Everything was fine. But it was a very loving childhood. My dad's love was very conditional. Like he knew exactly who to be to get approval. And in my mom's house, it was just a very closed, like she was very fragile. And I did that classic middle child thing of sort of protecting her and being who I needed to be around her. So I was just that sort of perfectionist middle child, very hypersensitive, painfully shy, and kind of dreamy child, kind of off in my head a lot. But I, learned how to be a perfectionist and to be who I needed to be in whatever situation. But I always felt like I never felt like I had a clear center of myself or knew who I was exactly. I guess that's also just part of the human condition. But we were kind of a weird family, not really social outcasts, but not really social incasts either. So I just kind of always floated at the edges and learned how to adapt or just avoid most social situations. But my dad's drinking got pretty bad in high school, and my older sister and I ran out of the house one night, and so he lost his job for that, and briefly went into rehab, although that didn't stick. But the lesson that it was very traumatic for hypersensitive little me. And so I was very adamant that I was never going to drink, and that was not anything that I wanted anything to do with. And I was so, lived a very sheltered life in my mom's house most of the time. And I was so certain that I wasn't going to drink that I signed up for the substance-free dorm when I went to college. And I really hadn't done anything. I didn't drink at all in high school. And so the first time that I did drink, I started college early in this summer French language immersion program. And there were all these international students and grown-up students. And they had this orientation, this wine and cheese mixer. And I was speaking French and feeling very sophisticated. That was really the first time that I drank. And it was also there was this older Iraqi gentleman. He's like, I have better wine than this in my room. And so I went along with that. So the first time that I got drunk was also like my first non-consensual sexual experience. Not very pleasant. And I woke up the next day and was in so much pain and had so much self-hatred and disgust. But I was very certain about one thing, and that was that alcohol was not the problem. And I really kind of fell in love with alcohol right then because it just gave me what I had been looking for, which is the way to be social and to be at ease and to kind of talk to people, basically. It let me loosen up. And so from then on, in my substance-free floor, it was on. And I was kind of anorexic at the time, so I could get drunk really quickly. And then I was also, ended up doing Russian studies, and I was hanging out with the Eastern Europeans and the theater kids, and it was just part of the culture, I thought. And it was part of the college experience. I studied abroad in Russia, and it was perfectly normal to drink a bottle of vodka at night. So I felt very, culturally appropriate and adventurous because I could keep up with the locals. And they thought I was a bit insane because, like, no matter how hungover I was or how many degrees below zero it was, I would always get up the next day and go running in the snow. So I thought it was a bit nuts. So this was also a pattern throughout my drinking that I always felt like my obsessive health routines kind of canceled out my debauchery. So it was kind of just normal college drinking, I suppose. I met this Romanian dude in college, and he was very gregarious and charismatic and insane. And he just didn't give a shit about what people thought about him. And I really admired that. And I wanted so much to be that. So we started dating off and on, and it was a very melodramatic and turbulent and codependent relationship from the start, and I really liked that as well because that was kind of another sort of high that made me feel very alive and melodramatic and less boring. And he drank a lot, and I kept up with him. And first time we went to Romania was at Christmas time. We almost didn't make it on the flight because we had a big fight the night before. And we spent the entire time there. Like, we drank all night and woke up at 3 and partied some more. And I thought that was just part of the cultural experience. And it was all very fun and romantic. Yeah, we were dancing in this underground bar, and I knocked my tooth out, and we had to find this. It's Christmas Eve, and we had to find this like off-duty dentist who looked like a butcher in a tracksuit, and he pulled up my tooth in his living room, and I don't know, we decided to get engaged at the same period. So I had this really formal Orthodox church ceremony with like my tooth hanging out. It was very romantic. So that was kind of my college experience was very much intertwined with this relationship. And then after college, I had no idea what to do with myself. But I got this fellowship to teach English in France for a while. And I was petrified because I'm so terrified of speaking in front of people. So instead of preparing for it, I just pretended it wasn't going to happen and didn't do anything. We spent the summer kind of drinking and doing whatever drugs we could get our hands on in Vermont, which wasn't a whole lot. But then I don't remember a single class that I taught there, but I did very quickly find my local friends in the local bar. And I started hanging out with his ex-heroin dealer. And so for Christmas, I asked him if he could get us some Coke, and he did. And he taught me how to freebase, and I kind of went straight out of my mind into this really psychotic episode. And I thought he was part of the Portuguese mafia, and I tried to take a taxi to Paris, and then they told me I could take a train. So I ended up like wandering around Paris for I don't know how many days. Like, I was following these Johnny Walker signs that said to just keep walking. And then I ended up in the psych ward on Christmas, and I don't know, my dad came and took me home somehow, which made him feel very heroic, and it was a nice bonding moment. And so I decided not to come back for the second semester. In the meantime, the Romanian was in Florida, and he had got fired from his job for doing too much coke, and he also lost his work permit. So it was either marry him or never see him again. So I decided to marry him, and we eloped in Fort Lauderdale, and I was wearing flip-flops, and it was all very romantic. And we figured one fuck up plus another would surely equal success. And it was all very, I got a job in New York, and he followed me, and he didn't have a work permit yet, because it takes a while. But It was just, we were in our 20s in New York and all we could afford to do was drink. So that's what we did. And I pretty early on pegged that he had a drinking problem because, I knew what alcoholism was and I could see it in him. And he definitely drank every night, more than I did, and on weekdays. And I generally didn't do that during the week. And he had anger issues, and that started to come out. And his depression was a little bit draining on me. But I was right there with him, a nice codependent little spouse. And so I got, I ended up getting more like professional opportunities. I got a Fulbright to go to Cameroon. He came with me. And then I got a job in DC and he followed me and he wasn't very happy, but I was enjoying myself professionally. I started to study in the Netherlands to get my master's degree. He didn't follow me and we, should have split up many times, but we didn't. And things just didn't work out very well for him. He was always angry. And I was always trying to make it better. And so that was kind of the pattern for quite a while. And we drank a lot. And then as I was finishing my master's, he got this job teaching English in Bangladesh, and I didn't have a plan. So I followed him because it was my turn to follow. And it turned out to be, I didn't know anything about South Asia. And funnily enough, we both thought, well, this will be a great opportunity for him to drink less because at least in principle, Bangladesh is a dry country and you can't buy booze except in the commissary or in these very colonial expatriate clubs, like the Dutch club and the American club and the Nordic club. But it was also, it's a quite a insane madhouse of a place. It's incredibly crowded and there's just so much noise and chaos and madness all of the time. And it had a very like vibrant expat life as well, but everyone who would live in Bangladesh was a little bit mad as well, which was great because it was kind of a meeting place for, misfits and weirdos. And it was a great place to drink because that's what we did for fun. And we had some really fabulous parties. And great house parties and costume parties. And it was really, I'm not going to lie, it was a lot of fun. But it was also like you could drink how you wanted to because there was no judgment really because everyone had seen everyone at their worst. And then you got up and went to work with them the next day. So it was a great place to drink. But it was not a great place. So I found a job pretty quickly working for an NGO, and I had a boss who was really a fabulous mentor. And so my professional life really started to take off. I was starting to kind of come into my own. And my husband was not doing well. He did not take to Bangladesh well, and he was kind of losing his mind and fighting with everybody all the time, and just drank is pretty much it. So he started to lose it, and finally he had a bit of a breakdown and left the country. I didn't know where he was going to go. He didn't know where he was going to go. So I decided to stay because I was doing well, more or less. But then things really fell apart between us, and I had this very public affair with the coach of the national football team, and he obviously found out, and then it was still like 2 years of this maudlin back and forth between the two of us before we could make up our minds. And so in the meantime, like I really started to fall apart as well, and that's when my drinking really took off. And we'd have these maudlin middle of the night calls, and I was blacking out and evidently having these tearful phone calls with him. And he'd call the next day really worried about me, and I'd have no idea what had happened. So I learned what blackouts were, and it just like, I don't know, this booze allowed me to like express all this venom that I had pent up and hadn't been able to express. And I just started to have this like personality switch, like the switch would flip and I'd become this monstrosity of a person. I really didn't like that. I was also a self cutter, and so I was doing a lot of that. And after my husband left, I had this really, I was just a mess. And I was basically flinging myself on like the least available guy that I could find and basically forcing myself on them, and then usually ending up in tears or cutting myself in front of them. I was a very charming and really classy drunk. And there was one night I was drinking with this British buddy of mine whose daughter also self-harmed. And so for some reason he wanted to watch. So with an audience, I went all out, and I like woke up the next day in this pools of my own blood. And I had these slashes all up and down my arms. And it was like, I had to get to work. I was such a bad liar, and I was trying to figure out some way to explain this. Like, did I have a rickshaw accident? Maybe I ran into some barbed wire. It's like 120 degrees, and I had to find some long sleeves to wear. But it kind of scared me, that little incident there, and I thought maybe I might have a problem. So I tried to, I started Googling signs and symptoms, and I tried all of the things to limit myself to like 3 drinks at night. And I was trying to drink water in between, or chew gum, or eat before I went out, or all of the things that we do. And I tried this moderation management program for a while, which did not work. When I went to the villages, I wouldn't drink usually when I was there. So I kind of welcomed those little breaks. But otherwise nothing worked. And I would swear to myself I was never going to drink again. And not even the next day, it was the same evening, I'd be back at the bar. And I just like had no idea what would happen when I drank. Like sometimes I could drink 6 glasses of wine and be fine. And sometimes it would be 1 and just, I have no idea what was going to happen. And I didn't remember what happened. And I was just kind of a pain in the ass to my friends. They thought I was suicidal, and I wasn't, but I did. I was the only one who really suspected that I might have a problem with drinking. So after 4 years there, I really just had to get out of Bangladesh, and I got a job in Cambodia, which is the exact opposite. It was a very placid, very calm place. It was you could drink normally. And so I drank a little bit less insanely, but still it was like every couple of weeks, some shit would happen. And I just become this horrible person that I hated, or I have to apologize to someone, or I just wouldn't know what had happened. So it kept following me. And then a year later, I got another job, this kind of a dream job that was based out of Atlanta. So I was moving back to Atlanta to take that job, and I stopped on the way home to see my best friends in New York, like the people that I feel the safest with, who know me the longest. And I hadn't seen him for years. And it was like one of these quiet little normal dinner parties. And they had invited this mutual friend of mine, and she must have said something like, "Oh, you and Brent would be great together." So I got it into my head that Brent and I had to get together, and that would solve all of my problems. And he was like this very Brooklyn hipster, and he brought some buffalo grass infused vodka or something. And that was like that switch flipped again. And like I somehow like dragged him back to his place. I haven't seen my friends for 5 years, in the middle of the night. And like, I don't know, I cut myself all over his sheets. He was very upset about the sheets. And I tried to jump out the window. And somehow he like got me on the train in the morning, and I got to my parents' house. But that also that was one that freaked me out, because it was such a safe place. And these were people that didn't know hadn't seen me that way for a while. And that really just kind of terrified me. Um, so I moved to Atlanta, started a new job. And it was the same thing. I was doing really well at work, professionally. I had it all together. But it was just kind of just unpredictable. Like I would have no idea when I was going to lose it entirely. And it just started to get really tiresome. Um, so my last drunk was just very kind of anticlimactic. It was like some weekend I had, I was like coming down with bronchitis or something. I was going to go home and go to bed, but this guy called and said, let's go have one drink. And one drink turned into an entire weekend. And then it was, I was like running in the middle of, I was completely wasted, but I hadn't gone running yet. So I was running in the middle of the day and like in the middle of the city and wondering if everybody could tell if I was wasted. And somehow like something in my head questioned, maybe this is not normal and maybe I need to do something about it. And in the meantime, my ex-husband had actually gotten sober and gotten to AA. And somehow that made it like acceptable. Like if he of all people could consider going to AA, then kind of made that a possibility for me. So I woke up the next day on a Sunday and I looked up a meeting and I spent the entire day just terrified and waiting because I thought my life was going to be over. And I didn't know. Yeah, I just thought that was the end of my life. And I was just going to, I didn't know what I would do. But I walked up to this meeting in Atlanta and I just realized that I couldn't blame it on my husband. I couldn't blame it on the country. I couldn't blame it on the city. It was really me. And I was just so tired of being just being this split personality and having to hide so much of myself and being just so tired of hating myself. So I was really miserable. And then I walked up to this meeting and it was like full of these young people and they were all laughing and smoking. And they were these, I don't know, young bearded hipsters with tattoos. And there were some women who looked like me. And it was just completely different than I had anticipated. And there was this young woman who had also traveled a lot like I had. And so I got her number and we met up the next weekend and she became my first sponsor. And I started working the steps with her. And I still wasn't really convinced that I was an alcoholic. I really didn't want to say that out loud. But I did start working the steps with her. And when I went through the first step, it did seem like there was a pattern there. And I really liked the idea of having this step work because I could, attack it like a school assignment. I really wanted to get like an A+ in AA and be done with it. So I really was very studious about the steps the first time around. And the first time around, it was very much about like all of my character defects were really about self-esteem. And that was the big issue that came out. And I needed that to come out. She was a very kind sponsor. And she made me just basically say yes to everything. I was terrified. I don't think I said a word for the first year in a meeting, but I did, get women's phone numbers, and she did force me to go out afterwards and hang out with people, which was horrible. But little by little, everything was a first, and I found it terrifying, but also really exciting because it was like getting to be reborn, but consciously, and going through all of that awkwardness and of all these firsts, like the first sober dinner party and the first sober work event and the first flight sober and the first holidays, and it was all terrifying, but also, kind of exciting. And like you're getting to relearn how to be human, but with, people. I could call my sponsor, and she just always had the right thing to say, and a very like practical response for me. And I don't know how far into sobriety it was, but I just remember, and I obviously didn't realize how much I drank until I tried to stop drinking. And then like getting to 30 days I was just so overwhelmed. I was just like bawling the entire meeting. But there was one point in sobriety where I realized that I hadn't said I hate myself in like a really long time. And that was a milestone. And guess what I got in sobriety was this unconditional love. Like people just accepted me and loved me no matter who I was or how I was. And it didn't matter. And that was, what I had been looking for really and missing all my life. And I definitely had a hard time with the God concept, and I didn't understand that and didn't want to get to that. But I was able to find like a prayer that worked for me, which was the promises, like that I could say and believe in. And that was enough to get me through the steps the first time around. But the next few times I started doing the steps, like the more I got into sobriety, the more I was able, like I had enough self-love and love from you all that I was able to start doing the harder work of introspection. I was always good at like bashing myself, but having someone else call me out was a completely different story. And so learning to admit when I was wrong and actually take action and admit it to others was a very painful growing experience as well. But it was also very liberating because it allowed me to just accept more of myself, flaws and all of that. But I really did learn that I, was that egotist with the inferiority complex, and that was also a little painful to face. And then I learned in sobriety the word no. It's also like being a toddler. Like I discovered the word no, and that I could say no to things, and no is a complete sentence, as my sponsor used to say. And I, learned to just respect my body and listen to what I wanted to do, and to start not doing things just to make other people happy, but to start learning what boundaries were. That was a really eye-opening experience. And like just by sticking around and hanging around the program, I didn't really know what the higher power thing was, but I started to want that, because people would talk about their relationships with their higher powers. This was like this very personal relationship, and I'd never wanted that before. But then I started looking for a sponsor who had that. And I became a little bit more willing to try different practices, and I tried different meditations, and just became a little bit more open-minded on the spirituality side. I started writing my own prayers because I still didn't know what I was praying to, but that was something that helped me. And then it wasn't until like 5 years into sobriety that I stumbled on this particular practice that just really grabbed me. And I had this almost I just felt this very physical high from this. It was a particular yoga practice that just grabbed me, and it made me all of a sudden realize that that's the higher power connection. And that's that conscious contact that people are talking about. And then I, became very alcoholically obsessed with that, and dove right into that. But it's really been that 11th step practice that's really been kind of the center of my program for the past couple of years. And sometimes I'm more connected than others. But I, started to really have more of that conscious contact and to be able to seek guidance before I get in terrible psychic pain and before I fuck up rather than afterwards. But it's a process, and I just think that being open and just sticking around, and I really do think it's that it is that through the process of working the steps that you come to that experience. At least that's been my experience. And I also find that, however meaningful my spiritual practice is right now, if I'm not working the steps and I get too far away from them, then that restlessness and irritability and self-loathing starts to creep back in. But I also find that whenever I get too far away from the program, my higher power just does pull me back in. And that's what happens with getting a sponsee like Carlina, who is, such a gift to me. And she gets me back working the steps. And, when you work with others, there's this beauty of seeing how the program works in others. And you keep getting reminded of this incredible higher power that is our collective group. And it just reminds me that, if I can see it in others, then it's probably still working in me. But I do really need to be connected and to keep close to this program. And I feel like the steps are just that basic framework that I need to keep growing in this program. So I guess whenever I start doubting my alcoholism and think maybe I should do a little controlled drinking, I do remember that it's a progressive disease and that I don't have to go all the way to the bottom as my dad did. I can get off when I'm done. And I hope that, as the promises say, no matter how far down the scale we've come, our experiences can benefit others. But I'm just really grateful to Carolina for letting me speak and for introducing me to this meeting, because the meeting has been really a lifesaver during this period. And I'm just so grateful for this program and for the life that it's given me and for all of you for being here. So thank you, Carolina. That's all I got.